In the autumn of 1529, the fate of all Europe was not decided by kings seated on their thrones, but by mud-covered miners and starving soldiers. On one side stood the seemingly invincible war machine of the Ottoman Empire with 100,000 troops. On the other stood a lonely, battered city defended by farmers, merchants, and craftsmen, people who had never been born to carry weapons. If Vienna were to fall, the gates of Europe would be thrown wide open. There would be no Germany, no Italy, and world history would veer onto a completely different path. This was not merely a siege for territorial gain. In the eyes of those who lived through it, this was the apocalypse. But history is always filled with strange and fascinating ironies. The most curious truth of this war was that the greatest, most terrifying enemy of the mighty Ottoman army was not human at all. The road to Vienna had in fact begun 3 years earlier, not with glory, but with a blood-soaked tragedy. In 1526, on the plains of Mohács, the summer sky hung heavy with dark clouds, as if foretelling the collapse of an era. Two armies faced one another in a deadly gamble. On one side stood the proud but fading kingdom of Hungary knights in gleaming steel armor, carrying medieval chivalric ideals, believing that courage and God would shield them from any foe. On the other side was the perfect war machine of the Ottoman Empire, tens of thousands of soldiers trained from childhood to obey without question, to fight like machines, and above all, to win through iron discipline. The Battle of Mohács lasted barely 2 hours. Far too short a time for a kingdom to fall, yet more than enough to change history. When rain began to fall over the blood-soaked field, it was already over. The Hungarian army was completely annihilated under Ottoman artillery and musket fire. King Louis II, only 20 years old, drowned while attempting to flee across a flooded stream. His crown was found days later floating in the mud. In that moment, everything changed. Hungary collapsed, and the door into the heart of Europe was kicked wide open. From the east, the Ottoman tide surged forward. Their ruler, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, young, confident, and already legendary, did not want land alone. He wanted Rome. But to reach Rome, he had to step over the corpse of Vienna. To Suleiman, Vienna was the golden apple, the key to Europe, the bridge between East and West, between Islam and Christianity. Suleiman was no dreamer. He was a tactical genius. He knew the Habsburg dynasty was overstretched. Emperor Charles V ruled a vast empire stretching from Spain to the New World, but he was consumed by wars in France and the religious turmoil stirred by Martin Luther. Vienna had been left exposed. Suleiman calculated a perfect checkmate strike, fast win quickly, while the enemy was divided. His confidence grew into arrogance. Before setting out, legend says he made a declaration that electrified the Ottoman court and sent a chill through Europe. Within 2 weeks, I will have breakfast inside St. Stephen's Cathedral. This was not merely a military objective, but a proud act of blasphemy, proclaiming that the Eastern Sultan had come not only to defeat kings, but to challenge their faith itself. In Vienna, the emperor's brother, Archduke Ferdinand, faced an impossible task. Desperate letters for help flew across the continent, sealed with red wax and fear. Priests warned of Judgment Day. Merchants packed their belongings and fled westward. For the first time, Europeans felt that the very center of the Christian world could truly collapse. Meanwhile, in Istanbul, the forges worked at full capacity. 60,000 Janissaries in white uniforms and 50,000 Sipahi cavalry assembled. Following them was a moving city engineers, blacksmiths, cooks, even the Sultan's gardeners. When the snow melted in the spring of 1529, war drums thundered across Istanbul. Their objective was clear. They were coming for Vienna. When the Ottoman army began its march, it was a breathtaking spectacle. Miles of men and horses stretching to the horizon, armor gleaming in the eastern sun, red and green banners snapping in the wind. Most importantly, Suleiman brought with him a secret weapon, the tool meant to turn Vienna's walls into dust-massive siege cannons. These bronze monsters weighing tons could fire enormous stone balls capable of crushing any medieval fortress. But from the very beginning, an invisible enemy appeared. Not European armies, but Mother Nature. The spring of 1529 was grotesquely abnormal. Endless rains poured over the Balkans, roads turned into rivers of mud, wagons sank to their axles. Oxen and horses collapsed and died while trying to haul the massive cannons across flooded plains. The Ottomans were used to war. They did not fear blood, but they were not prepared for mud and bone-chilling cold in the middle of summer. Thousands of soldiers fell ill with malaria and dysentery. Food supplies rotted. Gunpowder grew damp, turning into useless sludge. And here Suleiman made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. To maintain marching speed, he ordered most of the heavy cannons abandoned. The bronze monsters' pride of the empire were left to sink into the Balkan marshes. Suleiman believed sheer numbers would still be enough to crush Vienna without them. It was his first fatal strategic mistake. Even so, the army advanced like a shadow swallowing the land. Villages lay empty. Smoke rose from farms. No one dared resist this force. Suleiman rode at the front silent and composed the golden crescent banner glowing against red silk. By September, as they neared the Austrian border, the weather worsened. Cold rain lashed the army. Supplies rotted in wagons. Even the Ottoman war machine began to slow, trapped in the same mud that had swallowed the Hungarian army 3 years earlier. But they did not stop. They endured, waiting for glory. Inside Vienna, news of the invasion spread like thunder. But instead of fleeing, the city did something unthinkable. It turned itself into a weapon. The supreme commander of Vienna's defenses was Count Nicholas Graf Salm. He was 70 years old. In an age when life expectancy barely reached 40, he was a living fossil. Yet Salm was a hardened mercenary who had spent his entire life at war, understanding it better than almost anyone. Facing Suleiman's fiery 35-year-old vigor was Salm's 70 years of blood-earned experience. When Salm arrived in Vienna, he saw a disaster. The city walls were ancient, in some places less than 2 meters high, thin and fragile. They had been built for medieval bow and arrow warfare, not to withstand modern artillery. If Suleiman had brought his heavy cannons, the walls would have collapsed within a single day. But Salm knew what the enemy lacked. He knew the heavy cannons had been left behind. So he did not rely on stone. He relied on earth. Salm ordered soldiers and civilians alike to pile thick layers of packed soil behind the old stone walls. He understood a simple principle of physics: stone is hard but brittle. When struck by cannon fire, it shatters into deadly fragments. Earth, however, is soft and flexible, absorbing impact and swallowing cannonballs without exploding. A simple tactic from an old man, but devastatingly effective. At the same time, Salm carried out a brutal yet brilliant scorched earth strategy. He ordered all the beautiful suburbs around Vienna burned to the ground. Houses, villas, gardens, workshops, everything was destroyed, so the Ottomans would have no shelter, no food, and most importantly, no wood to build ladders or siege towers. He turned the surroundings of Vienna into a deadly wasteland before the enemy could arrive. Inside the city, people tore down their own stone houses to reinforce the walls. Wooden floors were ripped out to build barricades. Church bells were melted down into ammunition. Women carried baskets of earth children, hauled stones. By early autumn, Vienna was no longer a city. It was a living creature bristling like a hedgehog in defense. They knew that once the siege began, no relief would come. The nearest relief army was in Germany weeks away. The final city gates were shut. Vienna stood alone. Then on a gray morning in late September, the hills began to move. The Ottoman vanguard appeared. The Sultan's golden tents rose like a city of silk in the valley below. Count von Salm stood on the walls, his cloak whipping in the wind. "Let them come," he said. "This city is not made of stone. It is made of people." And as the sun set, the first cannon shot thundered. Hell opened its gates. Day after day, Ottoman artillery roared. Even without the heaviest cannons, the firepower shook the ground. But the most terrifying threat did not come from the sky. It came from below. The war entered a new nightmarish phase: tunnel warfare. Ottoman engineers, masters of siegecraft, began digging deep tunnels beneath the city walls, planning to place explosives under the foundations and blast them sky high. Inside Vienna, panic spread. At night, people pressed their ears to cold floors, listening for the haunting tap, tap, tap of enemy pickaxes. Each sound was a death sentence drawing closer. To counter this, the Viennese devised a crude but effective warning system. They placed empty barrels in underground chambers and scattered dried peas on top. When the ground trembled from digging, the peas would jump, revealing the enemy's position. Bloody fights erupted in the cramped darkness of the tunnels, lit only by flickering torches. Ottoman soldiers and defenders stabbed and hacked at one another with daggers and shovels, choking on gunpowder, smoke, and earth. Each time Vienna's defenders blocked the tunnel, catastrophe was averted by inches. Tension reached its peak in early October. Food ran out. The stench of death hung everywhere. Yet Vienna's will did not break. When a section of wall collapsed, civilians, men, women, monks, threw themselves into the breach, forming a living wall against the flood of janissaries. They fought not for a king, but for their own survival. By mid-October, Suleiman's position became desperate. He had never lost a battle, but now he was losing to another enemy time. Winter came unnaturally early. Cold rain turned to snow. In the Ottoman camp, disease spread faster than orders. Horses starved. Soldiers shivered in thin summer garments from the east. Supplies rotted. Suleiman faced one final gamble. He knew his men were at their limit. Even the janissaries, his most loyal warriors, began to grumble. They threatened mutiny unless there was a final assault or a retreat. Suleiman gave the order: one last all-or-nothing attack. On October 14th, a storm of fire descended upon Vienna. War drums merged with thunder. Waves of white-clad soldiers surged toward the shattered walls. But the Viennese, exhausted and starving, fought with the strength of those who had nothing left to lose. Count von Salm, though gravely wounded in the leg, a wound that would later take his life, continued to defend the most critical position. When night fell, the attack had failed. Thousands of Ottoman bodies lay beneath the walls, buried in mud and snow. The next morning, an eerie silence covered the valley. On the walls, Vienna's soldiers squinted through the fog. They could not believe their eyes. Silk tents were being dismantled. Fires were dying out. The mighty army that had shaken the world was turning back. Suleiman had ordered a retreat. He had not been defeated by sword or spear, but by the iron will of a small city and the brutality of nature. Remaining cannons were abandoned gunpowder dumped into rivers. As the army withdrew, heavy snow erased the footprints of the invincible army. Suleiman returned to Istanbul still a great ruler, but his dream of conquering the West was buried forever at Vienna. Inside the city, church bells rang for the first time in weeks. People cried, laughed, and embraced amid the ruins. They had survived. This victory saved more than a city. It reshaped the boundaries of the modern world. The Ottoman Empire would endure for centuries, but the peak of its expansion ended at the gates of Vienna. And there is an intriguing anecdote. When the Ottomans withdrew, they left behind sacks filled with strange black seeds. The Viennese initially planned to burn them, thinking they were camel feed, until a former captive recognized them as coffee. Vienna's first coffee house was born, and European coffee culture rose from the ashes of war. Even the crescent-shaped croissant is said to have been created by bakers to mock the symbol on the Ottoman flag. Though this remains debated, it is a wonderful story nonetheless. From that autumn of 1529 onward, the balance of the world began to shift. Vienna taught Europe a lesson even the mightiest empires can bleed, and history is sometimes written not by conquerors, but by those who refuse to surrender.